Men are used to the same predictable script. When they mess up, they already brace themselves for your emotional storm. They expect the tears, the accusations, the endless paragraphs of texts, maybe even a dramatic post on social media. Your anger doesn't surprise them, it fuels them. Because the moment you lose control, they see proof that they still hold power. The more you react, the more secure they feel that they still occupy space in your heart. But everything changes when you step out of that script. When you choose silence instead of tears, calm instead of chaos, you shatter their entire worldview. Because the one thing men are never prepared for is a woman who no longer reacts the way they expect. Picture this. He assumes you'll call, you'll send dozens of texts, you'll demand answers. Instead, his phone lights up once with a short message. Thank you for giving me clarity. I wish you all the best. And then silence. No arguments, no begging, no explanations. That quietness shakes his heart more than any confrontation ever could. This is not a mind game. It's a conscious choice. When you refuse to be dragged into the storm of emotions, you send a powerful message. I no longer allow you to define my worth. And that throws him completely off balance. Because the truth is your anger, your tears, your outrage, all of it tells him you're still tied to him. But when you stop giving him that reaction, you become an enigma, a mystery, a woman he can no longer predict. And in a man's world, nothing unsettles him more than unpredictability. Silence is not surrender. Silence is power. You're not giving up, you're shifting control. Instead of showing him your breakdown, you leave him alone with his own thoughts, his own doubts, his own confrontation with the emptiness your absence creates. And that emptiness will haunt him more than anything you could ever say. Understand this. Your silence is not avoidance. It is the strategy of dignity. It is how you refuse to play a role in a script someone else has written for you. And when you break that script, you don't just confuse him, you free yourself from the cycle of emotional dependence. Men think they know exactly how you'll react, but when you choose stillness, when you walk away with composure, you don't just flip their expectations, you rewrite the story. A story where you no longer define yourself by someone else's actions, but by the strength and dignity that rise from within you. Your silence is the loudest declaration you'll ever make. No shouting, no proving, just one graceful step forward. And that is the first step toward reclaiming all of your power. The first thing you must understand, a reaction is not the same as a response. A reaction is instant, it's emotional, impulsive, and uncontrolled. A response is chosen, it's measured, intentional, and rooted in dignity. One comes from emotion, the other from self-respect. When you react, you unconsciously reveal that someone else still holds power over you. One provoking text, one act of betrayal, one disrespectful comment, and suddenly you're pulled into their trap. You lose your calm. You fall into the game they wanted you to play. In that moment, you become the one being led, not the one in control. But when you respond, you change the rules. A response doesn't come from impulse, it comes from reflection. It doesn't come from hurt, it comes from composure. It doesn't come from a need to prove, but from the quiet confidence of knowing your worth. A reaction might look like dozens of desperate texts, harsh words, and endless arguments. A response might be as simple as one line, I understand, I wish you all the best, and then silence. No debates, no dragging it out, no giving them another chance to touch your emotions. A reaction tells them you're in pain. A response reminds you that you're still in control. That's the difference. Reacting makes you smaller. Responding makes you greater. Think of it psychologically. When a man realizes that one careless action can push you to lose control, he knows he still has power. But when he messes up and you don't react the way he expected, when you don't scream, don't cry, don't beg, he becomes unsettled. Because the power he thought he had dissolves in front of him. Choosing to respond instead of react is more than an action. It's a declaration that no one else drives your emotions anymore. You don't need him to see your worth. You don't need to prove you're enough. You already know it. And your response becomes the evidence. Men may be used to arguments. They may endure tears. but they are not prepared for the calm of a woman who masters herself, because in that calm, they see something far more dangerous than anger your freedom. A woman who reacts is still bound. A woman who responds has broken free. And when you respond instead of react, you don't just reclaim control of your emotions, you reclaim control of your life. Remember this, reacting might give you a fleeting sense of relief, but responding takes you forward for an entire lifetime. Reacting shows you're still playing their game. Responding shows you've stepped off the board and no one can control you anymore. Choose reaction and you lose your peace. Choose response and you protect your dignity. And once you hold on to dignity, that dignity becomes the strength that leaves anyone who disrespected you utterly disoriented. A man can endure your shouting. He can endure endless arguments. He can even endure your tears, because all of those prove one thing: you still care, you're still attached. You're still trapped in the game he controls. But there is one thing a man is never prepared to face: silence. Silence is not surrender. Silence is not weakness. Silence is the sharpest psychological weapon you can use because it forces him to confront himself. When you choose silence, you deny him the fuel he craves, your attention, your anger, your desperation. And in that empty space, confusion begins to grow. Imagine this. A man hurts you, fully expecting the usual storm. He thinks you'll call, demand answers, confront him until he's forced to respond. But instead, what he receives is absolute quiet. No long messages, no arguments, no attempts to prove yourself, just absence. That moment shakes him more than any fight ever could. Because silence creates a kind of pressure no argument can. In a fight, he still has room to push back, defend, twist the narrative. But in silence, there's nothing to hold on to, nothing to control. He's left alone with his own choices, his own guilt, his own reflection. And that is what disturbs him most. Silence is a mirror. It doesn't reveal your emotions, it forces him to face his own. It doesn't list his mistakes, it makes him sit with the reality that he has lost someone who no longer needs to speak. A woman who chooses silence is not weak. She is too strong to waste her power proving anything. She doesn't need to expose him. She doesn't need explanations. She doesn't need drama. Her composure makes her an enigma. And in a man's world, an enigma is unbearable, because it strips away his control. Silence is also freedom, because when you fall silent, you don't just strip away his power, you liberate yourself from the burden of reacting. You stop wasting energy on meaningless battles. You reserve it for yourself, for healing, for growth, for the things that truly deserve you. Remember this, men expect reactions. They prepare for tears and fights. But no one is prepared for a woman who walks away in silence. That silence plants questions that haunt him long after you've gone. Why isn't she angry? Why isn't she arguing? How can she walk away so calmly? Those questions are what keep him awake at night. Not the arguments, not the text, the silence, because silence speaks louder than words. Silence engraves a truth he cannot ignore. You've broken free from his control. And once you do, you become the kind of woman no one can ever underestimate again. Nothing shocks a man more than when he expects to see you broken, but instead he sees you glowing brighter than ever. The truth is, you don't need to make him regret with words. You don't need to argue to prove your worth. All you need is to keep growing, keep moving forward, and keep shining in ways he can never stop. A glow-up is not revenge. A glow-up is transformation. It is the journey of turning pain into fuel, of turning loss into the foundation of a stronger version of yourself. When you choose self-elevation instead of self-destruction, you don't just step out of someone else's shadow, you send a clear message. I don't live to prove myself to anyone, I live for me. Start with the simplest thing, your body. Instead of abandoning yourself in exhaustion and sadness, pour energy into health and strength. Not to make him jealous, but because you love yourself enough to want to be vibrant and full of life. Let every drop of sweat in the gym become a declaration. You are no longer the victim, you are the victor writing a new story. Then redirect your energy toward passion and purpose. Men expect you to be consumed by them. Instead, let them see you consumed by your dreams. Pour yourself into your work, your goals, the ambitions you once put on hold. When you shift the focus back to yourself, you transform heartbreak into fuel for your success. But glow up is not just about appearance or achievements. More powerful than both is your presence. A woman who has walked through pain but rises again with self-care and renewed confidence, that image is unforgettable. Because men may be used to the sight of you crying over them, but they are never prepared for the sight of you radiant without them. The true power of glow up doesn't come from vengeance, it comes from self-love. When you invest in yourself, when you choose to grow, learn, and elevate your mindset and lifestyle, you become a version of yourself that no one can deny. And in that moment, he realizes he once held a jewel and let it slip through his fingers. Glow up is the most elegant response. It requires no announcement, no confrontation, just quiet progress. And that quiet progress speaks louder than any accusation because it shows you don't need anyone else to survive, to be happy, to shine. When a man looks back and sees how far you've gone, realizing he can no longer keep up, that's when the weight of his loss truly hits. But here's the truth. Glow up is not for him to regret. Glow up is for you to rejoice. It is your way of proving to yourself, I am strong enough to turn wounds into wings. Pain can break you, but if you learn to use it as fuel, it will lift you higher than you've ever been. That is the power of glow up, transforming what once weakened you into the very thing that makes you unshakable. As long as you're still arguing, still crying, still trying to prove your worth, you're giving energy to the very person who hurt you. You're still playing on a chessboard they control. And that means no matter how strong you think you are, you're still letting them dictate your life. But the moment you pull your energy back, everything shifts. You stop letting your emotions be dragged into their games. You stop wasting strength on proving yourself. You pause and you redirect that energy back where it belongs, into yourself. This is the turning point. Because a man can handle your anger. He can handle your accusations. In fact, he may even welcome them because they prove you're still orbiting his world. But what he cannot handle is indifference. What he cannot stand is when you pull every ounce of energy away from him and channel it into building yourself. When you stop reacting, he loses control. When you stop explaining, he loses excuses. When you stop watching, he loses the supply of attention. It's this detachment that throws him into confusion. Detachment doesn't mean you never loved. It doesn't mean you never hurt. Detachment means you choose not to let the wound keep draining you. You accept what happened, but you refuse to let it define what comes next. Instead of giving energy to someone who never valued it, you pour it into healing, into growth, into becoming your best self. And here's the paradox. The more detached you become, the more magnetic you are. Because your energy no longer comes from the need to be validated, but from the quiet confidence that you were whole all along. A woman who carries that energy moves differently. She speaks differently. She doesn't beg for love. She becomes the very source that love is drawn to. A man can dismiss tears. He can ignore arguments. But he cannot ignore a woman who is completely detached from him, who still lives, still shines, still thrives without him. Because in that moment, he's forced to face the harshest truth. He no longer holds power. Detachment doesn't mean closing your heart. It means opening it in a new direction toward yourself, toward what nourishes you, not what depletes you. And when you walk in that energy, you send a message louder than words. My life no longer revolves around you. It revolves around me. Your energy is your most precious asset. Don't give it to those who don't value it. Because once you reclaim it, you don't just break free from control. You build a strength no one can destroy. And that is what unsettles a man the most. When he expected you to collapse, but instead he sees you rise, radiant, calm, and completely untouchable. In that moment, he realizes the game is over. And through detachment, you have already won. In every conflict, what people expect most is a reaction. When a man does wrong, he's already braced for your anger, your tears, your fiery arguments. He knows how to deal with that. Because as long as you're angry, you still care. As long as you're arguing, you're still trapped in the storm he created. But there is one thing he is never prepared to face: your peace. Peace is not avoidance. Peace is not fear of confrontation. Peace is the boldest declaration that you have taken your power back. When you choose peace, you're saying, I refuse to let you control my emotions. And that stillness becomes the hardest blow of all. An argument can drain you for hours, days, even months. But a single moment of peace can shift the entire dynamic because peace forces the other person to face themselves. No one to blame, no one to fight, just them and their choices, and that is their deepest fear. A man can forget your tears, he can dismiss your pleas, but he will never forget the woman who walked away in absolute peace. Because that moment carves a truth he cannot deny. He no longer has power. Peace frees you from the need to prove. You don't have to explain how much you are hurt. You don't have to scream to show your pain. You simply hold your dignity, walk away in silence, and let your peace be the answer. That is the strongest message of all. You no longer have access to me. Remember, peace doesn't mean you were never hurt. It means you refuse to let the hurt define you. It means you choose to protect your mind and your heart instead of wasting them on battles that have no end. It means you place your inner calm above the need to prove yourself to anyone. Peace is the ultimate weapon because it does two things at once. It protects you and it unsettles them. It forces them to ask, why isn't she angry? Why isn't she arguing? How can she walk away so calmly? And those questions are what haunt them long after. When you choose peace, you reclaim control. No one else decides whether you're happy or broken today. You become the only keeper of your emotions. And that is the kind of power no one can take lightly. A woman who carries peace doesn't need to speak much. She doesn't need to prove anything. She only needs to live, to walk, to exist in quiet confidence. And that alone makes her a symbol of strength. Because in the end, real power doesn't live in noise, it lives in stillness. It doesn't live in winning arguments, it lives in keeping your peace. And when you achieve that, you don't just win over others, you win over yourself. No arguments, no long texts, no tug of war, just walking away. And that is the move that disorients a man the most. When a man does wrong, he assumes you'll fight to prove your worth. He expects explanations, questions, maybe even begging. He is used to seeing you react. In his mind, you could never be strong enough to leave quietly. But the moment you walk away without the need to prove anything, the entire game ends. Walking away is not weakness. On the contrary, it is the strongest declaration of self-respect. It says, I don't need you to recognize my value. I know my worth, and I refuse to waste another second convincing someone who never truly saw it. Men often think they have time. They think you'll wait, hoping one day they will change. They believe that when they return, you'll always open your arms. That false belief is what makes them careless. But when they come back and find you're gone, that you no longer stand where you once were, that is the shock they never expected. Walking away without proving yourself is also how you reclaim your power. As long as you're explaining, you're still placing your value in someone else's hands. As long as you're trying to make him see, you're still playing by his rules. But when you choose to leave silently, you cut off every ounce of power he thought he had. What unsettles a man is not your tears. It's not even your anger. What unsettles him is when you walk away as if you were never shaken, as if you never needed him to exist. That decisive calm forces him to ask, what did I just lose and why can't I ever get it back? Understand this. You never need to prove you're good enough. You never need to beg someone to acknowledge your worth. Value does not come from outside recognition. It comes from how you treat yourself. And leaving with dignity is the way you affirm that truth, not to him, but to yourself. A woman who walks away without needing to prove has matured to understand this. Real love never demands the loss of dignity. Real connection never forces you to shrink yourself. And if a relationship constantly requires you to prove your worth, then it's not love, it's captivity. Walking away is not your ending. Walking away is your beginning. Because when you leave behind what no longer fits, you create space for what truly belongs. When you stop proving your worth to the wrong person, you give the right person the chance to see you in your truest light. And the most beautiful part is this. When you walk away without needing to prove, you don't just leave him questioning himself. You teach yourself an unforgettable truth. You are strong enough to save yourself. And from that moment on, no one will ever make you doubt your worth again. Here's a simple truth. Revenge never brings healing. You might believe that if you hurt him back, make him jealous, or prove you've leveled up without him, you'll finally feel relief. But the harsh reality is this. Revenge only keeps you trapped in the cycle of pain. You're still revolving around him just in a different form. And that means you're not truly free. True victory isn't about proving him wrong. It's about no longer needing to prove anything at all. It isn't about him regretting what he lost. It's about you walking away in absolute peace. because peace is the one thing he was never prepared to face. A man may expect angry texts. He may be used to your tears or arguments, but he will never know what to do when you do nothing, no accusations, no retaliation, no attempt to get even. You simply choose peace. And that choice disarms him completely because it proves one thing: he has lost all power. Peace is the quietest yet most powerful declaration. It says you've come home to yourself. It shows you've learned to place your happiness above your obsession with someone else's validation. And most importantly, it proves you've turned pain into strength instead of chains. A woman who chooses peace doesn't need noise. She doesn't need to expose her story on social media. She doesn't need to flaunt her victory. She simply lives, moves forward, and focuses on her journey. And that silence echoes louder than anything else. Because distance and serenity deliver the clearest message: you can no longer reach me. True victory is when no one else's actions dictate your emotions. When you hold on to your peace, you take back all your power. You stop letting the past define you. You stop letting pain decide your future. And you begin to walk as a new woman, stronger, brighter, unshakable. A man can forget the woman who argued. He can dismiss the woman who pleaded. But he will never forget the woman who left in peace. Because that image is not just a goodbye, it is proof of growth, dignity, and inner strength that no one can ever take away. Peace is the final victory. Not because it makes someone else regret, but because it liberates you. It severs every invisible chain. It opens the door to a new life where you are no longer defined by those who hurt you. And when you walk away in peace, you don't just reclaim your life, you affirm a deeper truth. Real happiness is never dependent on anyone but yourself. That is the greatest victory. A victory with no audience, no applause, no need for recognition. A victory only, but powerful enough to transform your entire life. And once you arrive at that victory, you become a woman no one can ever wound again.